To create our world widget, I broke down the process into steps. This way you can really fully understand that. The first step is we're going to create just an atlas. So we're going to take D3, the geo, and we're going to combine some libraries, and we're just going to create an atlas. So to get started, I recommend you start a whole new project. So go to create React app and use our template, and then I called it the project WorldMap chart. So you can use the same name or whatever name you like. And after you set your project, also import it into your favorite IDE. And we can get started. In terms of libraries, we need few libraries. First of all, we need to add D3 and D3 types. We've done this before. Then we need few more libraries to install. We need D3 geo and the type for D3 geo. D3 geo, we'll use that for the geographic projection. This is actually the drawing of the map, and you can you can visit that module on GitHub to learn more. The other libraries that we need is we need the topo.json client and the topo.json client types, and that's really, it's a client that's going to allow us to manipulate the topo.json, and the topo.json is the library that provides the map of the world, which we can use to draw the map. Then we're also going to need the GeoJSON and the GeoJSON types, and the GeoJSON is allow us to format the encoding of the geographic data, and so it's going to take the topo.json files, and then it's going to allow us to format it according to the specification and the structure from given from the GeoJSON organization. Then we're also going to need the React UUID. We used that before. That's to create keys. So it's just going to make our life easier. And later we're going to need D3Q, D3 request, and so we should install those already. So this is the D3Q is going to allow us to do multiple requests at once and put them in a queue, and also D3 requests. So we'll use that to do few loading and put them in a queue. So I'm going to leave you, the link is in the book that attached to this section. So just make sure you install all those libraries before we get started. One more thing we need is we need to download the WorldMap JSON file. So if you go to d3.js.org/world-110m.version1 JSON and put it inside of public data, put the JSON there. If you open up the file, you can see that this JSON file is really giving you the data of the world atlas, and it provides pre-built countries data. So this really gives us all the data that D3 needs in order to create our atlas. Next, let's create our D3 component. So if you go to component, look at the README. We're going to use the template for D3. And in terminal, let's call it world map. And that's of type D3 using the generate React CLI template that we have. And then in our app.tsx, we want to clean things up. So let's take everything out of the header and let's add our new component. So world map. Let's see, maybe it didn't create it yet. Make sure it's created. Yeah, world map. Sometimes it takes a few seconds to index. World map. It's going to take a few seconds probably to index. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to change it from world map. Let's refactor it to world map atlas. And everything we're going to do, we can just add it to the to this folder here. And just to make sure the changes kicked in, let's make sure. WorldMap Atlas, okay, this looks good. And WorldMap Atlas, the function. And looks like I forgot to install D3. So make sure you got everything installed. So yarn add D3 and D3 types. And then in the app, import that component. Okay, here we go. So WorldMap Atlas, we're importing the component. Let's start by cleaning up some of the method here. We don't need the reference, so I'm going to delete that. For the state, we don't need this state. We're not going to use even the draw, because what I want to do is just to create the atlas quickly, just to show you how to work with the map. So I'm just going to leave a div tag. Okay, so I'm really cleaning everything up. So all that I have is, take a look. I have a really simple function and a use effect and a div. That's it. Next, we need to retrieve the data of the map, which include the countries. Let me just collapse this div so we don't get an error. Okay. So the way we can do it is we can retrieve it using the fetch method that's built into React, or we can use the D3. I'll use D3 because it's less code. I haven't checked on performance which one really is better, but D3 is less code because it's already formatting it as a type JSON, and the fetch we need to kind of format it that way, so it's easier and less code. So our URL is data/world110 JSON that we downloaded, and then once it's loaded, we can use the then, and we can pass the data and use an inline function and return the data. And once the data is returned, we can put a then, and now what we're gonna get is really the world map data. So let's call it world data, and inside we can create a constant that will hold the data we're getting. So we're taking the data and we're going to turn it into map features that we can use to draw our atlas. So we can create a map feature, and the type of it is going to be an array type. You're going to need to check to dig into all those libraries to find in all the type. I already done that. So the type is array of type feature. That's inside of the geo.json. So we're taking the JSON and we're going to turn it into our map features, and that's of type geometry. Oops, I had a typo. Or a type null. Make sure I'm opening and closing my tag. See, that's also part of the geo.json geometry, or type null. That's going to be my type, and that's going to equal, what we're going to do is we're going to take the feature from the topology library we installed, and we're going to pass the world data, and we're going to pass the world data. We're going to call the objects, and inside the object there's the properties for the countries. So we need to pass the data and the countries, and then this needs to be cast as feature collections. So we're going to cast it as feature collection from the geo.json, and then we're going to take the features property. I'm just going to put, I haven't, we can create a type for the world map, so we don't need to put a TS ignore, but I want to put minimum code. This is our hello world, so I really want to put a minimum code just to see it working. Then what we can do is we can check the data and see if we like what we see. So just do console log and then put the map features. Oops, map feature. I'm getting one error for the D3. We need to import D3. Doesn't let me do it automatic with the IDE, so I can just do it myself. So import everything as D3 from the D3 library. Okay. And if everything went well, we can put a line breakpoint and set up a debugger and check what we're getting. Let's take a look. Okay, we try it again. So, okay, here I am. I'm at the line breakpoint that I put to see the map features, what we're getting. So if you look at the map feature in debug mode, you can see that it's a collection of objects that has the feature and ID and the properties and the geometry and the coordinates. So this is really the object that we can use to draw a map. Let's get out of debug mode. So now that we have the data, what we can do is we can create a state that will hold that data, and then we can use it when we render our atlas. So I'm going to create a constant, and let's call it geo. Let's call it geographies, and we'll put a setter tool for our geographies, and I'm going to use state. Let's see that, okay, it added it to our import, and in our use state, I'm just going to set it with an empty array as my initial state. And now once we get the map features, we can set it with our map features. Okay, we don't need the console anymore. And now that we have that property ready, it's complaining because of the type. It's if you hover over, it tells me it needs to be of type geometry or null or geometry property, because it doesn't, otherwise we cannot set it correctly. So what we can do is we can just use that type in our state, and that should do it. So it should be of type array or an array feature of type geometry or null. So you can see it's definitely, using TypeScript give us some extra work. Okay, now you see the error is gone. So using TypeScript give us that extra additional work, but it's worth it just to make sure we're casting everything right. But it's also helping us because it makes sure we understand the code better. Okay, now for our div, we don't need it even in a div, so I can just start and collapse a tag because we need some kind of container for our render. And what we can use is we can use the SVG, and we can the SVG we need to set a width and we need to set a height. What I can do is I can just extract those values so we can change our scales without the need to touch our component. So I can just create a scale method, and it's going to be of type number, and let's put the initial scale as 200. So now we can set a width and height. So for the width, we'll use the same scale, so we can just do width equal scale. I'm not passing it to the parents component, so that's why it's just a constant. And the height, we can put it of type scale. Doesn't like my formatting. Yeah, it needs to be indented 2 spaces based on my ESLint rules. It needs to be indented 2. Then another thing we need to use is the Viewbox. We haven't used Viewbox before, but if you look at our cheat sheet for SVG and you look for Viewbox, you could see that the Viewbox, it creates the artboard cropping area. So it's going to crop anything we don't want. So we can create some kind of cropping area just to make sure it's, our map doesn't exceed our area. So you can just, in SVG, we can create a Viewbox, and in the Viewbox, we can put the 4 locations. So we do 0, 0, and then take it all the way, let's say, to 800 by 450. Then once we have our SVG, the next thing we can do is we can create a group, just like we always do. And inside the group, we can take our geographies, and since it's an array, we can map them and then use a path to draw a map. So it's going to look like this. I'm just going to use the geographies, and we're going to cast it as an array. And once it casts as an array, we can map it, and then it's going to have 2 properties. It's going to have the data and the index. So let's use the data and the index, and an inline method to handle that. And then when we handle it, what we're going to do is we're just going to draw a path. So we can draw a path. Since we're using several, it's going to map through an array of path. So what we really need to do to make sure that React can handle it is we need to create a key. We've done this before. So if you don't create a key, first of all, it won't even compile, and it's complain, and it can get confused in terms of the DOM what to change. So we really need to create a key. And what we can do with the keys, we can just use what we did before. We already imported the UUID, so we cannot use the index because the index can change, and we cannot use any other property. We can create our random key, or we can just import our UUID because it doesn't have at this point a TypeScript library. Then we can either create our type, or we can just use require. I usually like to use require because if I don't have a type file, if we have a type file, you can just edit to your type file. For the path now that we have the UUID, I can use the template format, and let's call it path. So we're making sure that this is going to be a unique key. And then for the data, what we can do is we can use the geopath. And you can see if I import it, the geopath is part of the projection, geoprojection. And I can use the projection, and then here it expects some kind of projection to pass to it, and the projection is how our map is going to look like. So we need to create that projection and then pass the data, and that's going to bring it as a string. Okay, so now really what we need to do is we need to take the data that we set and we need to create a projection. So we can do it here on the return. This way it's gonna change in case we want to pass some of the properties to the parents component. So the projection I'm going to be using for first map is going to be geo equal earth, and you can see D3 has all those different projections that we can play around with, and we can switch. I'll show you how we can switch them, but let's just create one just to see it work, and then inside we can scale it. So we need to use the scale to scale it, and the scale we're going to be using is the scale we set up. So you see we set the scale for 200. 200 is going to be our initial value, but when we draw it, I use scale, but we want to draw it 3 times the size of 200. So we can do it like this. We can scale it as times 3, but use the scale that we set, just drawing it bigger than what it's going to get projected. And then we can translate the location of the projection to the CX and CY. So we're going to translate it. We can put also the CX and CY location. We can also create a properties, a constants for them. So we can change them if we want. So we can set them to, for example, let's put it 150 for the CX and the CY. And we can do the same. So now we can use that data in our, right here in our translate. So CX and CY for the left top corner. And then the only thing we want to do is we want to set the rotation, so we can actually rotate our atlas, but we're going to rotate as, we're not going to rotate it, so I'm just leaving 0, 0. So those are the angles we're going to use. Getting some tons of errors. That's because my SVG, I need to close the SVG tag as my wrapper instead of, I've been closing it inside, so I'll just align everything. Okay, so we have the SVG tag, the G tag doesn't like, the D needs to be with an equal sign. A few more problems. This needs to be in a quotes, not in a bracket. And our bracket here is wrong too. Okay. And then we need, now we can pass the projection we created. And we need to change our bracket. Okay, great, no errors. Now let's go ahead and test it. We can just call localhost 3000. And here we go. We got our first hello world for World Atlas. If we want to make it a little prettier, what we can do is we can create a fill that will cover the countries. So we can create a fill, and then in the fill we can use the geography data in order to create an RGB that will kind of fill the different countries differently. The way that we can do it, if you remember when we covered the color spaces, we have the RGBA, so we can use the alpha on the RGB to create a unique alpha for each country. So we can pick a color, and then for the last property, which is the alpha, what we can do is we can use the geography data. We can take, for example, do 1 divided by our geography and we need to make sure that it's either going to be the geography's length or it needs to be a 0. We cannot have alpha with no value. So this statement is going to make sure, and then we can multiply by the index for each one of those paths. This way it's going to look unique. And then we can also put a stroke. So for the stroke, that's going to use keyword color spaces. I'll use Alice blue. And we need to put a stroke width. I can put it as 0.5, just something that will give us a stroke size. Okay, we're ready to test. Great. Now when you go to localhost, you can see that we have the different countries with different alpha color, so it's easy, and we have the stroke around the countries. What else we can do is we can actually change our projection. So right now I'm using the geo equal earth projection, but if I switch the projection to, for example, geo, you can pick any one. Let's say we use the geo stereographic projection and go back and refresh. You can see that we got a different projection. So, you can pause the video and start playing around with those projection. And you can see how we can really take D3 and with very little code, we're able to create a world atlas map. And then we can use that atlas map as a background for component we can use it to start interacting with.